Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher X video. All right, we're back with friend of the channel, Fat Electrician's video. It's called American Pilot Obliterates 5 Enemy Planes in 4 Minutes, Edward Butch O'Hare. By the way, congratulations to the Fat Electrician, has crossed over 1 million subscribers. Incredible for such a short period of time. Original video link is down below. Make sure you supported that. Make sure to get his merch. All right, let's get started. All right, by the way, the hat you've all come to know and love, that's even now in oversimplified lore, it's getting old. It is disgusting now, but have no fear. The replacement is here. Here we go.
I hate it when I start researching for a video and the truth ends up getting in the way of a good story. Luckily, this is a good story regardless.
Truth gets in the way of a good story.
Today we're talking about America's first naval ace of World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, Edward Butch O'Hare. But first, a word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Delete Me.
Finally.
Is that a CMMG descent?
Come find out.
Guys, I gotta go. Well, actually, hold on. What's it chambered in?
It's 300 blackout.
Yeah, I gotta go.
Chapter 1, Easy Eddie. Here we go.
His father. So, once upon a time in 1893, Edward Joseph O'Hare, EJ for short, was born in St. Louis, Missouri as the son of 2 first-generation Americans that had just come over from Ireland. He spent his entire childhood in St. Louis.
World War I pilot then, huh?
He would meet his wife Selma, they would end up getting married, and then they would live in an apartment above a grocery store that was owned by Selma's father. Shortly after that, in 1914, Selma would give birth to their first child, Edward O'Hare, that would later come to be known as Butch. Butch would also get 2 little sisters, Marilyn and Patricia, and by all accounts, they had a really happy little family. Okay, fast forward 1923, EJ takes the Missouri State Bar, he passes it, becomes a lawyer, and almost immediately gets this new client by the name of Owen P. Smith, and he is the commissioner of the Greyhound Racing Association for the entire nation. And he needs a lawyer because he needs to patent his invention, that little electric rabbit that goes around the dog racing track that all the dogs chase. So EJ gets that done for him, and then Owen decides that he wants to keep him around, so he makes him a business partner because he needs a good lawyer that's going to be able to help him keep dog tracks open and open up new dog tracks, because at this point in time, dog tracks received a ton of political resistance. And this is because in 1910, gambling got outlawed, so for the next decade, all the dog tracks were just going out of business, because without the gambling revenue coming in, the business just wasn't financially viable. And I mean, nobody wants to go just watch dogs run in a circle if you're not betting money on it, right? If so facto, all the dog tracks ended up shutting down.
Horse racing, most types of racing, fighting, gambling's behind everything. You guys understand how big gambling makes sports? Look at something like fantasy football, you know, and you get so invested and you start watching, you know, games of teams you don't even care about just because you have things on the line, like you're going to win, you know, money, but, you know, whatever. Capitalism.
Except for the ones that were willing to engage in underground illegal gambling, which is why they needed a good lawyer like EJ. But before EJ even passed the bar and became a lawyer in 1923, things were already set into motion that would eventually change that. You see, 1920 was Prohibition, when the government banned alcohol. Okay, sidebar, the amount of videos...
Got to get your historical context. Why did they do Prohibition? Because of the Industrial Revolution, there was an incredible amount of pressure put on working men. When we're working for low wages, incredibly hard and dangerous hours, and because of that and the stresses of that life, men were turning to alcohol. It was very profitable. The famous thing is that there was way more bars, you know, than churches. You can go to a street corner and see 4 different bars. Anyways, it became a domestic issue problem because men were drinking and it was becoming a problem in the household. Angry dad, you know, depends on the type of drunk, gets drunk, comes home, frustration, abuses his family, abuses his children, get in all kinds of other type of potential immoral behaviors. The kind of religious society, the religious groups behind that, as well as with women, were really pushing for legislation, eventually leading to Prohibition. What's going to end it? Well, the Great Depression. Great Depression needed to bring in revenue. One thing we know about Prohibition is that it did not stop the sale and consumption of alcohol. It was done illegally because it was still very profitable. Well, the thing about illegal products is they're not taxed. So when the Great Depression comes around, one of the instant revenue increases could be legalizing alcohol once again, and of course taxing it. That's why it happened.
that I have done on this channel and my other channel, The Fat Files, where everything ties back to Prohibition, is absolutely insane. It's like that game, you know, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, where every single person on the planet knows Kevin Bacon within 6 relationships. I can do any historical event and tie it back to Prohibition somehow, in some way, in some fashion.
Probably easier.
It's possible.
Take a look at this. Jesus Christ, Charlie.
I mean, just off the top of my head from videos that I've already covered, Prohibition is directly responsible for Domino's not going bankrupt in 2012, every American warship having an ice cream machine on it, that time that America had multiple ships completely dedicated
to all Fat Files videos,
ice cream and distributing it to the Pacific Theater in World War II, the fact that there's 7 billion pounds of cheese in underground caves all over America, the fact that every dairy farmer is required by law to pay into a giant advertising fund so that they can advertise milk, which is where Got Milk came from. Pretty much all the IRS codes regarding tax evasion, and now this story as well is also brought to you by Prohibition, that one time that the US government tried to ban alcohol and failed miserably. Now, as we all
one of the legacies of Prohibition has also been an experiment of the government trying to legislate morality, at least to that extent. And it seems like we found the line that American society also felt that you couldn't cross. Like, there's things that legislate morality, and when it came up to prohibition, the banning of alcohol, it's like that's where the line was. We found out where it was.
Oh, no,
the government should not cross.
Banned, organized crime stepped in. They started distributing alcohol. They established speakeasies. They had bootleggers. They manufactured their own booze, and they made a ton of money while they did it. And by 1925,
get shipped from Canada.
They had gotten so wealthy and so powerful that they were actually able to buy off politicians and law enforcement, and they were able to get away with whatever they wanted. And they were looking for more ways to make even more money, whether it was legal or not.
Politicians infamously consumed alcohol at speakeasies and other ways. They had it all the time. They, you know, it's like in the Qing Empire when during the Opium Wars, like before the Opium Wars, where the government protested the sale of opium, while at the same time, like the Emperor of China was addicted, and so was much of the officers and the politicians in the Qing dynasty living in literally the Forbidden City in Beijing, all using it.
And one of the things they decided that they wanted to do was to get into gambling via dog racing tracks. And now that they had politicians on their payroll, they would actually be able to get the building permits, build all new dog racing tracks, and not be busted for gambling by the law enforcement because they were paying off them too. So you're a big time mobster that wants to get involved in dog racing. Money's not going to be an issue. Getting building permits from politicians isn't going to be an issue. And the law enforcement's going to leave you alone. What's the last thing you need? You need somebody that knows how to run a dog racing track and one of those stupid electric rabbit things, right? Right. So that's what they do. The mobsters go and they get a hold of Owen Smith and his legal consigliere, E.J. O'Hare. And when I say mobsters, I just mean the first big time guy to figure all this out and put the plan together. And that was a gentleman from Chicago by the name of Al Capone.
Yep,
yeah, E.J. and Owen are now partnered with Scarface.
Definitely looks suspicious. And his Southern Italian heritage raises some flags.
Using Capone.
Capone, very influential too in bringing over alcohol, right, during Prohibition into the United States. Well, at the same time, he also had a lot of support from a lot of people because also provided him and his organization also social services during the Great Depression, where the government and state officials and city officials had failed to. So there was actually a decent amount of some public support, but also a whole bunch of enemies. Very complicated figure there with Al Capone.
Connections, they end up building dog tracks in Chicago, Miami, and Boston, and they make a ton of money. And this goes on for years, and EJ ends up earning his new nickname from the mob, Easy Eddie. And back at the O'Hare house, they go from, you know, doing pretty okay financially to being very wealthy very quickly. And despite EJ, Easy Eddie, dad, being in bed with the mafia and working with Al Capone, when he's back home, by all accounts, he is a terrific father to all 3 of his kids and a great husband to his wife. But Butch, his son, is the absolute apple of his eye. They have a really special relationship. Using all this new money he has, he goes up, he takes him camping, teaches him how to shoot guns, and then he even gets into flying airplanes, loves taking Butch up into the airplane with him, and sometimes even letting him take control of the plane, and Butch falls
this is post-World War I.
Flying and shooting guns. And this goes on for years, being a bad guy for a living and being a good dad back
it's
at
a son.
So fast forward 1927,
I get it now.
Owen P. Smith ends up passing away. Now, since his business partner just passed away, he acquires the business and the patent to the electric rabbit, and this is where things get a little controversial depending on which source you want to read. Some sources imply that he swindled Owen's widow out of the patent patent and out of the money, and some other sources say that he basically paid her out. Which, to be fair, both of those are completely possible. He is a crooked lawyer working for the mafia, and also it's pretty standard practice that if you are in a business partnership and your partner passes away, that you buy out his shares and you acquire the entire business. So you can go ahead and pick whichever one you like more for that. Now, it's also at this point in time, right around 1927, that Easy Eddie and his wife Selma come to the realization that their son Butch is adapting a little bit too well to their new life of luxury. I mean, they have enough money to give their kids anything
Spoiled
they want.
kid.
The problem with Butch is all he wants is to sit in the house, read books, and eat donuts 3 times a day. He's 13
Hell
years
yeah.
old. He's already starting to get fat and kind of lazy. And one day he reaches peak laziness when he asks his mother at the age of 13, "Hey mom, can I borrow the car to go to the bakery?" The bakery is literally 4 doors down where he buys his donuts. He didn't want to walk like 60 feet to go get a box of donuts so he could eat it. At that point, his parents realized that they had a problem on their hands.
Is it more about the donuts though, or is it what he wanted to drive the car at that time? That could go either way.
So they do what any good parents would do. They come to him with love and compassion.
Send him
They
to
hold his hand and they
summer
look
camp.
deeply into his eyes and they tell him it's okay. I'm just fucking kidding. They sent his ass straight to military school.
Okay. Oh, okay. Heavyweights, underrated, absolute underrated classic. Watch Heavyweights.
Crazy? No way!
So he gets shipped off to Western Military Academy in Illinois. Fast forward 3 years, 1930.
Ben
Butch is
Stiller.
in his junior year of military school, and he absolutely
Keaton
loves
Thompson.
it. He's not much for conventional sports like football or wrestling. However, he did end up joining the water polo team, which he really enjoyed, and that's actually how he got his
Water
nickname,
polo is
Butch. And
brutal.
he has decided not only does he enjoy military school,
So
but he
hard.
wants to go on to be in the actual military. He wants to go directly into the U.S. Naval Academy. So that's what Butch is up to. Easy Eddie's still just raking in the dirty gambling money with Al Capone, so much so that in 1930 he buys a massive mansion that has an indoor skating rink and an indoor pool in this really fancy neighborhood in St. Louis. And this is the part where the truth kind of gets in the way of a good story, because when this story is usually told, there hasn't been all this context that I've already given you guys. It's literally just they open up like, hey, there was this lawyer that worked for the mafia and Al Capone. His name was Easy Eddie, and he was the best lawyer around, and he's the reason that Al Capone got kept out of prison, okay? Which, right out of the gate, that's not true.
For a
okay?
while.
Easy Eddie
No, he
wasn't
got caught.
Al Capone's lawyer. He happened to be a lawyer that was a business associate of Al Capone, okay? If Al Capone got arrested for a DUI or whatever, it wasn't like he was calling up Easy Eddie to come represent him in court. That
Makes
never
sense.
happened. They then go on to explain that
Well, because so many people around him are going to get arrested. They finally get him on tax fraud for all the illegal activities. They couldn't, Capone was so good at hiding the criminal activity from being directly connected to himself. Everything was laundered. They had these other businesses that they would launder stuff through, and they could never connect stuff to him. They knew he was the orchestrator of so many of these illegal activities, but they can never nail him on that. So I forget who that famous investigator was or whatever. They're like, okay, let's get him in on something else. And they ended up getting it on some like tax evasion for, I think, for one of the fronts that they used that wasn't up to date on their taxes and able to put him away that way. And it seems like someone like Easy Eddie would have been, would have gone down with the ship with that, because it's probably lawyers or whatever that he did actually use that would have helped orchestrate all this stuff. So you could see they probably wasn't as connected that way. So it's like he was getting the money from, working with Capone, but smartly not being tied to the criminal activity.
him and his son Butch have this amazing relationship, and Butch is the apple of his eye, and he uses the wealth that he's accrued from working with the mafia to give his son everything he could possibly want. And then one day he has a change of heart and realizes that he hasn't given his son a good role model in life to look up to. And at that moment he decided that he was going to help the IRS put Al Capone in prison, proving to his son how to be a good person, and then the mafia assassinates him for it. And then his son, having seen his father lay down his life to do the right thing,
so he did get connected to it. The guy's dad that's part of all this stuff. So never mind, but not because not for, having to like, take the blame for all this stuff, but just you double cross the mafia. So you're going to get yours. So it was justice from the mafia. Kids, don't deal with the mafia.
That he's going to go off and become a war hero in World War II, and it's this happy story about redemption and doing the right thing, and it's also completely fucking made up and nonsensical. Okay, that story sounds great if Butch is like a 7-year-old little boy. He's not. He's 17, and he's been in military school since he was 13, and he's already about to go into the U.S. Naval Academy, okay? Do you know how fucking mad I would be if my dad, that I had a great relationship with, like one of my best friends that I confided in at the age of 17, and he came to me and was like, son, I've done some pretty bad things in my life, and I've decided to prove to you how to be a good man. I'm going to go ahead and turn myself in and get myself assassinated by the mob just to show you how to do the right thing. You know what I mean? Like, hey, dad, counteroffer, hear me out. What if you just retired, you're already rich, and then you just stopped doing bad stuff? That would set a pretty good example. I'm also 17, so I don't need you to just like set the example. I'm old enough and mature enough to understand the concept of like, hey, do as I say, not as I do. You know, maybe don't go get yourself killed basically for no reason.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
We lost 2 heroes.
What do you guys think?
An awning in their direction. No, I know. Jump 20 stories. Doesn't make sense, does it?
So again, that's complete nonsense.
Don't know enough about their relationship.
Not only is it not historically supported, it also doesn't even make sense if you
I mean, he didn't know he'd get
assassinated.
assassinated.
So here's what actually happened. In 1930, Easy Eddie does start working with the IRS because he's running all the dog tracks. He's helping Al Capone cook the books and basically launder all the money. And he's going to be able to show the IRS how he's doing it, which is going to be able to allow them to put Al Capone in prison for tax evasion. Now, from here, there's another myth that honestly I also
and probably save him too. You know, it's, you know, like a plea deal pretty much where he doesn't have to go down with Capone. He can give the information and give himself some immunity that way.
Basically, they insinuate that Easy Eddie actually helped the feds put away Al Capone in exchange for guaranteeing that his son, Butch O'Hare, got into the U.S. Naval Academy. Okay, and again, I don't know where this myth came from.
Yeah, how would that I don't know how to understand how that would
no historical evidence that supports it, and if you think about it, it doesn't even make sense, okay? The U.S. Naval Academy has like a 10 to 12% acceptance rate, and Butch O'Hare just spent the last 5 years in one of the most
probably a
military academies in the United States, and he performed well there. He's pretty much guaranteed a slot at the U.S. Naval Academy at this point. And we know how he performed once he got into the U.S. Naval Academy, and there was nothing that even remotely suggested that he didn't belong there. So if he was going to get in anyways, why on earth would Easy Eddie go get Al Capone turned in and get himself killed for no reason?
It seems more like what I was saying, which is wash his hands clean. Maybe he thought that Capone, the feds and everybody was getting closer and closer to him. And obviously if he was cooking the books, like it's like they're saying now, he wanted to make sure that he could preserve himself there. But then again, you run the risk of, you know, it's like who you want to piss off more, the government or the mafia? And he ends up going the mafia route, or sorry, the government route to protect him, I guess. And it sounds like that didn't work out. So
I think that it was 1930 and Elliot Ness and his crew of uncorruptible cops known as the Untouchables were going around putting all the mobsters in jail, and Al Capone was number 1 on their list. And Easy Eddie, being the intelligent guy that he was, realized that if they got Al Capone, and then they would just start working their way down the ladder and they would eventually get to him too. So he figured, hey, maybe I should help them get Al Capone, and then I'll get my own freedom instead. Now, in addition to this, to be fair to the myth that I did just try to debunk, it would not surprise me if there was some portion of this conversation where Easy Eddie was like, hey, I'm willing to be your guys' informant. My son is applying for the U.S. Naval Academy. If for some reason that it gets brought up that his dad is a famous mafia guy that works for Al Capone, and that is going to prevent him from getting in for that reason alone, I need you guys to tell them that I don't actually work for the mafia anymore and I'm working for you as an informant. That way my son gets what he deserves.
That makes more sense. It's not about getting him a boost to get in. It's just dad didn't want him to have to suffer for his mistakes, that, you know, his son wouldn't have to suffer those mistakes. And okay, so that makes, I guess, more sense. Was that actually a part of the deal? Like the plea deal?
Very big difference between he got his son in by turning in Al Capone and he got out of his son's way, while also saving his own skin, which was probably his primary goal to begin with. Regardless, Al Capone gets arrested and put in jail for tax evasion in 1931. Then in 1932, Butch sets off for the U.S. Naval Academy. While attending the academy, Butch does a great job and goes back home every chance he gets to hang out with his mom, his dad, and his 2 sisters. Now, right around this time, Easy Eddie and Selma end up getting a divorce, and Easy Eddie actually moves to Chicago so he can be closer to the racetrack that he's running. Okay, fast forward 1937, Butch graduates from the Naval Academy and he decides that he wants to go off to become a pilot.
Things are getting, because again, historical context, 1937, also an important year. You know, a lot of people think of 1939 going to be the important year for World War II. 37 is when Japan invades China, which was protested against by the American government, is going to put the military on high alert. So it is a time for military preparedness happening right now, even though the United States will not get involved in the war, but will start to put itself into places to protect their own interests.
The problem, you can't just go off to become a pilot right after becoming a commissioned officer after graduating from the academy. You have to serve a minimum of 2 years in the Naval Surface Fleet, so he sets off to do that, serving his 2 years on the battleship, the USS New Mexico.
He'll be trained by the time
for the next 2 years while
the Americans get in.
The dog tracks in Chicago. Then 1939 rolls around. He's done his 2 years worth of time in the Surface Fleet. He applies to get into Naval Aviation School and he gets accepted. And right as he is about to ship off to go become a pilot, he receives word that his father has been murdered on November 8th, 1939. Easy Eddie had just left his office at the dog track in Chicago and was driving home. And when he pulled up to a stoplight, 2 armed gunmen got out with 12-gauge shotguns and opened fire on him inside of his car. Eddie tried to escape, but he was shot multiple times and ended up veering off and crashing into a light pole, and he would pass away almost immediately from his wounds. Now, technically, we don't actually know who killed Eddie. This is considered a cold case. However, pretty much everybody agrees that it was a mafia because he was assassinated approximately 1 week before Al Capone was set to get out of prison from the tax evasion charges that Eddie helped with in the first place. So everybody just kind of assumed that this was Al Capone's gift for getting out of prison. Now, going back to my original anger with the oversimplified version of the story from blogs and newspapers and magazines and other YouTube videos, when they tell the story, it's like Easy Eddie helps turn in Al Capone and then he is assassinated for it. They fail to mention that he's assassinated like 9 years later.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. He was in prison for a long time.
It's kind of an important detail. Okay, setting that aside, Butch takes him.
He had 9 years, basically, of peace, I guess, away from them. I mean, I guess, was he still laundering money for Capone, who was, was he still operating things from prison at that time? Or was he, relatively separated, I guess, from the mafia ties at that time? Anyway.
He comes back home, he buries his father, and this is obviously extremely hard to do because that's his dad that died, but to make it even worse, the newspaper and the media is dragging his father, and by extension his entire family, completely through the mud. You gotta remember, this is the 1930s, the anti-mafia sentiment is at an all-time high, and because of this, the newspapers and the law enforcement hype anything up they possibly can to make the American public feel safer. They want them to feel like the war against organized crime is being won, and in this case, they hyped up Eddie to be something a lot more than he was. This is where the myth that Easy Eddie was the mastermind criminal genius lawyer that kept the entire mafia out of prison came from. That's how the media portrayed him after his death. And did Easy Eddie do some bad stuff? Yeah, absolutely. He enabled the mafia to make money from illegal gambling at dog racing tracks, and he made a bunch of money in the process as well. However, at no point was he the evil mastermind that was keeping Al Capone and all the mobsters out of jail. And having the newspapers vilify him to that degree was devastating to Butch and his family. I mean, yeah, he did some bad things, but he was a great dad to them, and from their perspective, he probably did those bad things to provide for his family. Whether that's right or wrong is a different conversation, but to them, he was still their hero. He was a great guy in their eyes.
Nick loves Eddie.
Deal with the emotional and mental stress of that, but they were also starting to get treated different by their community because
you start selling free Eddie shirts.
Was looking down on them because Easy Eddie was apparently this evil criminal mastermind, and all the money they have and all the fancy cars and the big house was clearly blood money, and now nobody liked the family either. At this point in time, it would appear that the last name O'Hare was forever going to be associated with the mafia and looked down upon forever. Now, I don't know this for sure because Butch never wrote about it, so I can't truly know his intentions. However, putting myself in his situation, I have to assume that he felt like his dad was in fact a good guy that was driven to do bad things for the right reason. Being in Butch's shoes, that's his dad, it was his best friend, it was his hero. Realizing that his dad had done horrible things to put Butch in the advantageous position that he was in now, having gone through military school, having graduated the U.S. Naval Academy, and now being headed off to flight school, Butch couldn't afford to waste the opportunity. His dad had become a villain so that Butch had the opportunity to become a hero.
Gonna make a name for yourself. All right, so that was a lot of context. Hopefully I was able to add a lot about just kind of what things were like in the 20s and into the 30s. So going from pretty much, end of World War I, and you got the roaring 20s going on, but then Prohibition, and then into the context for World War II. So we'll see what's going on now, and see how relevant this stuff is to actually Butch's life. That's what I'm kind of wondering. Or is that just kind of, cool information? You know what I mean? What does it have to do with Butch and Butch's story?
So Butch does the only thing he can do. He goes back out to flight school. While there, he does okay in the classroom. He's not the best at taking written tests, but when it comes to actually getting Butch inside the planes, he is exceptional. He is one of the best pilots they've ever seen, and he's even better at gunnery. This guy can put rounds on target with his eyes closed. He graduates from flight school in May of 1940. Then he gets stationed on the USS Saratoga, an aircraft carrier with VF-3. Okay, now at this point, we got to remember it's early 1940. World War II has officially started, but America is not directly involved yet. That being said, pretty much everybody in the military is aware that America is going to be involved soon, and they are training extra hard to get ready for that, as well as training as many new recruits as possible. So all of America's best warfighters at this point in time are pretty much sent in to go train as many new guys as possible. And the man in charge...
40's a rife time, is such a rough time for the Allies. I mean, by the end of the year, this is where Eastern Europe's done for. You had the Soviet Union comes in from the east, Germany comes in from the west, and they pretty much just pick apart Eastern Europe pretty quickly. But then also in that year, you're going to get the fall of France. You're going to get them moving up into Northern Europe, into Norway. But France is going to fall, and then you're going to get the pressure put on the British, which doesn't work out necessarily in the end. But 1940 was a bad year for the Allies, and with the Americans still on the sidelines, it was a very, very heightened time. Military still not all that big yet. There was still so many pushes to grow the size of the military, and FDR wasn't fully in on that stuff, coming through. But guys like MacArthur and stuff had been pushing so hard. And it was during the Depression where FDR and them are like, hey, we got to use our money to get people food on the table. You know what I mean? And fund the New Deal and do that stuff. Well, again, the military was like, we have completely slashed our military since World War I. And there's going to be another war, and it's happening right now. So what, troops and what we had as a military force at that time had to be extremely ready and be a trained force, because, if you have to go further beyond that, the small military that they had at that time, you're going to go to the draft, and you want to use the expertise of these guys and have them ready. So it's not just Americans sitting idly here. They're very much preparing what they think is going to be inevitable. It also puts the Americans at the odds of someone like Nazi Germany, who see this military preparedness. They see Lend-Lease Act and stuff like this going on that is going to be supporting, or it starts cash and carry, eventually Lend-Lease later. But anyways, the financial support and military support that's happening there, that also is putting the United States very firmly on the Allied side, even though we're still in 1940.
VF-3 to get all these new guys trained up and ready for war is a legendary pilot by the name of John Thatch. And this man is a complete badass. He is basically Maverick from Top Gun, except in the 1930s and 40s. This guy was training all the new guys that came through VF-3, and it was his standard practice to take the best, cockiest new pilots they had, and he would take them up in the air in F-4F Wildcats and have a mock dogfight with them. And he would allow the cocky new guy to get the advantageous position on him, just to shake them off, get behind them, and shoot them down first, just to show them how good they're not. Just complete dad energy. If we're going to set a tone right now out of the gate, you're not that good, you're going to shut up, you're going to listen to what I have to tell you, because it's the best chance you have at making it through this war that we have coming up. The dude is out there right now just breaking egos for a living, until one day there's a new pilot that shows up. He's not particularly cocky, but he's highly regarded as one of the best they have, and Thatch wants to take him up in the air just to see what he has, and he does what he always does. He lets them get the advantageous position, except this young pilot by the name of Butch O'Hare is so good that Thatch can't shake him. Now, Thatch is a better pilot overall, but O'Hare is so close in talent to Thatch that if Thatch does give up the tactical advantage, he's not able to recover. After seeing how incredibly talented Butch is, Thatch decides to take him under his wing and becomes his mentor. So they train a ton. It's that Yoda and Luke, the Mickey and Rocky type relationship. And one of the things that they start doing is they start trying to address the issues that they know they're going to run into once the war starts. And the big issue right off the bat is Japan's new fighter plane, the Mitsubishi Zero, that came out in 1940. It is faster faster
Zero's
and more maneuverable than
good.
the Grumman F4F Wildcats by a long shot. Okay, this means not only does the Zero have
And of course,
the
there's
edge
the
in
German
combat,
Luftwaffe,
it also
man.
means that the F4F Wildcats can't really run away because the Zeros will just chase them down and shoot them out of the sky. So Thatch, being the tactical genius that he is, realizes the only chance...
Mitsubishi, by the way, has an interesting story of their founding. So their founder was actually a former samurai. So during the Meiji Restoration, the samurai were either basically put to death or they basically morphed into the new upper social class of like this new era of Japan. A lot of them become politicians. Some of them become entrepreneurs. And the guy that founded Mitsubishi was a former samurai who then, you know, ended that as that era was ending and got into steel manufacturing. He had learned from British engineers and used that and created Mitsubishi. So Mitsubishi, you know, was bringing one of the early steel producers, right? Bringing Bessemer process, that kind of stuff over to Japan, late 1800s, early 1900s. And one of the things, again, that they manufactured heavily was, Japanese, you know, military vehicles. But yeah, I always thought that was cool. It's like this guy was a samurai, starts one of the biggest companies, you know, global companies in the world. Now we know for them as cars, but yeah, they used to make, you know, planes and stuff for the Japanese military.
Have is to fight. This situation is kind of like when he first met Butch and took him up into the sky. Thatch is a better pilot than Butch. However, if he was able to give up that small advantage, he wasn't able to recover. He needs to find whatever that small advantage is that the F4F Wildcat has over the Zero so that he can enable his men to win. And what he comes up with is a tactic that would later come to be known as the Thatch Weave. It's basically a counterpunch because he knows the Zeros are going to end up behind the Wildcats. They're faster, they're more maneuverable. Once a Wildcat has a Zero on its tail, another Wildcat's going to pull up next to it, and then they're going to cross paths, and then they're going to cross paths a second time, kind of like a zipper. And right as they're about to cross paths the second time, the wingman is directly lined up with the broadside of the enemy Zero.
But you have to have
open fire without
the numbers,
the risk of shooting down his friend. So it looks good on paper, but obviously he's got to see if it works in real life.
Well, yeah, what if it's not 2v1 though, and the guy crossing in behind is also being chased by a Zero? Do you just got to multitask there? Try to, you know, defend yourself while at the same time trying to take out your buddy's enemy?
So he calls upon his protege, young Butch O'Hare, to go up with a bunch of other planes to be the bad guys and try to chase down him and his guys where he can test the tactic. And it works out great. Butch was not able to shoot down any of them. The Thatch Weave would then be proven combat effective at the Battle of Midway, and it is still considered a viable dogfighting tactic to this day. During all this training, Butch would actually get some time off. He goes out, meets a young woman by the name of Rita, and on their very first date, he asked her to marry him, and she says yes, because Butch O'Hare doesn't miss. They then go, they have a honeymoon in Hawaii, they come back and they start living together in Coronado, California, while VF3 is stationed at North Island Naval Center. And while he lived there, everything went great. He was training a ton, he was busy, but he did get to go home to his new wife every single night. And then one day, Thatch decided to make everybody in VF3 come in for extra training on what appeared to be a random Sunday in December of 1941. And they did their training in the morning. Thatch cut everybody loose for lunch, and they were supposed to report back to finish training that night. And as Butch O'Hare was driving to his apartment to meet up with his wife for lunch, over the radio, he would find out that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. He gets home, he tells his wife, and I quote, "The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor. I'm to board the Saratoga as soon as possible. It's war." The very next day, the USS Saratoga and VF3 set off from North Island to go participate in World War II. On their way there, the world would find out about Wake Island, where 450 Marines and 1,200 civilian construction workers fought off the Japanese on a small coral atoll that the Japanese wanted to use as a forward operational base.
I covered the video. He did a video on that. That Wake Island story is so impressive. It's so interesting to hear about that. So check out that video, his Wake Island video, and then come back and you'll see, watch my commentary on it, and you can, see what I thought.
In the initial defense of Wake Island, the Marines and the construction workers were able to sink 2 enemy destroyers and a submarine, repelling their entire force. And this is looked at as America's first victory over Japan. And it was a silver lining that the entire country looked to in the days after Pearl Harbor. Because of this, America would immediately send ships to reinforce Wake Island. However, the ships that were leaving Pearl Harbor had a humongous head start. Amongst the American ships making their way there was Butch O'Hare and the USS Saratoga, as well as the rest of VF3. Unfortunately, the American leadership would come come to the realization that they were not going to be able to beat the Japanese there, and they didn't want to risk losing any more ships than they already had in Pearl Harbor, and they were ordered to back off and not try to save the Marines and the construction workers at Wake Island. After 2 weeks of fighting, the Marines and the construction workers were forced to surrender. Those that did not die in combat were either executed or held as POWs for the remainder of World War II. Because of how brutally the Japanese treated the civilian construction workers, the American government realized that they couldn't rely on civilian contractors to do all their construction on forward operational bases in the future. And this is where the Navy's construction battalion was originally founded, aka the Seabees. And those civilian construction workers that were at Wake Island are considered to be America's first honorary Seabees. During the same time, the USS Saratoga would be crippled by an enemy torpedo.
Just imagine how difficult, again, that would be to have to do these construction projects, which are so crucial to your military operation, but doing it up on the front lines where you have to be able to defend yourself while doing these crucial projects. It'd be so stressful.
VF-3 would have to rotate and now be stationed on the USS Lexington. Once there, it is the Lexington's mission.
Dude, look how packed the Lexington was.
VF-3 would have to rotate
planes.
and now be stationed on the USS Lexington.
Look at that. It's amazing that you could even function like with that. Like, how do you even like, I mean, they use every square inch of space so well, but like, how are you going to get planes to take off and land like that? I mean, aircraft carriers and the skill involved with pilots and incorporating them, it really is amazing. And it's such a huge advantage to have in your military to this day is functional, these aircraft carriers. It just puts your Air Force anywhere in the world within a very small distance. It's such an advantage. And very few countries to this day really have that many that are operational and as skilled as those are.
There is the Lexington's mission to penetrate deep into enemy territory so they can attack the port at Rabaul. They get like 450 miles away, and all of a sudden, a Japanese recon plane spots them. So they send some fighters up. Thatch himself shoots down this enemy recon plane. But he didn't get to him fast enough because they got that radio transmission out, and the Japanese bombers are already on the way to hit the USS Lexington. They start getting fighters up in the air as fast as they can as 9 Japanese G4M Betty bombers show up, and some of the fighters are already starting to engage the bombers, shooting them down. And Butch O'Hare is the last man slotted to get up in the air. He's sitting there on the flight deck in his Wildcat, fully fueled up as the bombers are coming in, getting attacked by the other Wildcats, and he's just waiting his turn to get up in the air, hoping that the bombers don't make it and bomb the USS Lexington with him right on top of it in a fully fueled up aircraft. By the time Butch gets up in the air, the combat's basically over. The bombers have been repelled, and most of the Wildcats are still chasing them down, and they end up shooting down all of them. And then a second wave of bombers gets detected on radar, and this is a humongous problem. You see, all the Wildcats are up in the air, and most of them have been in the air so long that they're out of ammo and fuel. And once those planes return from chasing down that first wave, they're going to have to land. They're not going to be able to fight. By the time that second wave gets close, the only planes available with fuel and ammunition able to fight are Butch O'Hare and the guy that went up right before him, Duff DeFillo. So what do? They do the only thing they can do. Butch and Duff get next to each other, and they are about to engage 9 Japanese bombers in a double V formation, and Butch fires his guns just to make sure they're all working, standard procedure. Duff goes to fire his. All of them are jammed. So Duff's out. It is now Butch O'Hare versus an entire formation of Japanese bombers all by himself. He's already running low on fuel, and he only has enough ammunition for 10 3-second bursts with his guns.
So what's protocol then for the guy that's jammed? Can he just be like a decoy? Can he just like get over the radio and say pew, 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 and hope the Japanese hear it?
He does not have enough ammunition to take down all of these planes. And even if he did, he doesn't have the time to do it all by himself. He needs to be as accurate as humanly possible. And that's exactly what he does. Using his expertise in gunnery, he is engaging engines and fuel tanks, and that is it. On his first pass, he manages to knock 2 bombers out of the formation. He then immediately goes into a second pass, engaging the first bomber he sees on the other side of the formation, critically damaging it as well, forcing it to drop its bombs early and peel away. He then engages the next bomber next to it, striking the fuel tank, causing it to blow up in midair. He immediately goes into his third pass, shooting down another 2 bombers before making his 4th pass, engaging another one. And while this is happening, the crew of the USS Lexington is just watching in awe as it unfolds before them. The admiral on board said, and I quote, "All of us on the flight deck and the bridges became so intent watching the aerial battle that it was hard for us to concentrate on our duties. At the time, the entire ship's company burst into cheers as our fighter shot the bombers down into the sea. It was not as though they were in the midst of a life or death struggle, but at a baseball
that's
game."
what I was saying. It's like in sports, they're outside cheering like, yeah, eating some popcorn or something like that. And they're like, wait, oh crap, we're actually really exposed right here. And they're actually trying to destroy us. But it was such a spectacle. I mean, but at the same time, you're scared because if they lose, they're screwed. Their whole aircraft carrier is going to go down. That would be, you'd kill them all.
After his fourth pass, Butch was completely
You're cheering for your own life
and almost out of fuel. The 4 remaining Japanese planes dropped their bombs, and all of them missed.
Oh.
All right. That was so hard.
In the span of 4 minutes, Butch O'Hare had pulled off the impossible, going toe-to-toe with an entire Japanese bombing formation, and during that time, he was everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. The entire bombing formation, returning fire on Butch, managed to hit him with a total of 1 bullet. Butch was engaging the enemy so quickly from so many different angles that one of the surviving Japanese pilots said, and I quote, "Enemy planes swirled around us, zooming, banking, diving, attacking
but it was one plane.
Directions, not realizing that it was one man."
One man.
So the 4 remaining Japanese planes that dropped their bombs and missed, they peel off, they retreat. Butch goes to land, and as he goes to land, he drops his landing gear, and some new guy on the deck opens fire on him with a 50 caliber machine gun. Luckily, it was all misses. Butch gets out of his Wildcat, walks up to the guy that was just shooting at him. It's some new kid that is now just shitting his pants because he almost just killed the hero of the day. And Butch walks up completely cool, and he's like, "Son, I don't mind if you shoot at me. Just try not to do it with my landing gears down." Which is probably the politest way of calling this kid an idiot to his face imaginable, considering that he just shot at him with a 50 caliber machine gun. Like, hey
oh
kid,
my gosh.
if a plane has its landing gear down and you're on an aircraft carrier, it's probably trying to land on you, meaning it's not an enemy. Why would you shoot at me?
Yeah. How do you think about that? Like, it's got its landing gear down. Is there any reason, I guess, I don't know, is there any reason you would think, it's like a Japanese plane. It's like, I'm going to land on there. You're going to like infiltrate the ship that way. It's like, a Japanese ship landing on an American carrier. Anyone ever try to do that? It seems like something that would be in like a movie. You go in there and then you land and then just start shooting everything.
Okay, now that the immediate threat is over, this has been like 30 minutes of straight chaos. We've got to figure out what all happened, where everybody's at, if they're okay. We have to get the planes ready in case there is another attack. There's a lot of stuff to do. So Butch, all the other pilots, and pretty much everybody else that would have seen anything goes in to get debriefed so the chain of command can try to figure out what all happened in this very busy couple of minutes. So Butch goes in and says, I shot up 7 of those planes really good. I'm pretty sure I downed 6 of them. To which the captain of the USS Lexington is like, actually, I'm gonna go ahead and only credit you with 5 because after you pulled off after your last run, there was still 4 bombers in the air that dropped their bombs, and there was originally 9 to begin with. I do think that you shot down the other 5 though, because well, pretty much everybody saw it happen. So now Butch has officially been credited with downing 5 enemy planes. This makes him an ace pilot and the first naval aviator ace of World War II. And at first, Butch doesn't think anything of it. He doesn't regard himself as being special. He doesn't think what he did was incredible. He thought he did exactly what anyone else in VF3 would have done if they were in the exact same situation.
Except nobody was as good.
As far as Butch O'Hare is concerned, the only thing about that day that was unique to him was that he happened to be in the right place at the right time. He wasn't necessarily the right guy. And then he came out of getting debriefed, and the crew of the
He doesn't realize how good he
already
is.
Went down to the machine shop and made him a trophy. He was everybody's best friend. He was the hero of the day that had saved the USS Lexington, and everybody was in love with Butch O'Hare, America's first ace. The crew of the USS Lexington and the rest of VF3 actually adopted a new drinking song that night as well. It goes something along the lines of, O'Hare, O'Hare, did the Japanese bombers go? O'Hare, O'Hare, could they be? Okay, now sidebar, in the spirit of full disclosure.
So that's when you know you're at that awesome status in the lore, I guess, of military history, is when you get your own drinking song that drunk guys are going to sing. That's like peak honors. I feel like you can get medals and all that stuff, but you get a bar song for you. I think that's got to top it.
After World War II, it has been decided that Butch O'Hare actually only shot down 3 enemy bombers on that day. Apparently, this is because the Japanese documented that actually only 3 planes were shot down during that wave. 3 of them returned back severely shot up, and 1 of them apparently got lost in a storm.
You sure about that?
Okay, and this is where I get annoyed, because on one hand, like, yeah, okay, I understand wanting to figure out the truth and clarify things, but also I feel like Americans typically tend to believe what the enemy says happened more than they believe the word of their own men. I mean, when the captain of the USS Lexington looks up in the sky and he's like, 1, 2, 3. There's 4 left. The rest were shot down. I don't know why we're not believing that guy. Why are we believing the Japanese documentation over that? And don't get me wrong.
Yeah, they don't want to make them. They don't want to make themselves look bad.
Miscounted. Maybe the entire crew that was also watching had a bad account of what happened. You know, because the enemy never ever makes mistakes. Just like the enemy that was under the impression that he was getting attacked by multiple planes all at once and they were everywhere all over the place. When in reality, it was just Butch up there by himself. Okay, and I know this is crazy, and I'm definitely biased, but I'm always going to be more inclined to believe the guys on my team than the enemy. But hey, whatever. I'm not the expert. That's one thing. Whatever. Maybe
it's hard too, because you also have a lot of bias yourself. You know, that's when we talk about, like, as historians, about the reliability of the evidence, right? So it's like, okay, a guy said he saw them count how many planes there were there, versus like the manifest, you know, that comes in, and the inventory that comes in, and then multiple different sources, because your side's going to have a bias and their side's going to have a bias, and it's not just me versus you, but it's also what type of evidence is there. So us as historians, that's what we have to try to do.
The USS Lexington miscounted and the Japanese counted right. I guess that is possible. However, I will argue till I die that the Japanese pilot that got shot up by Butch O'Hare and then magically got lost in a storm that none of the other shot up planes managed to get lost in absolutely got shot down by Butch O'Hare. Okay, I don't care if the storm did the last 5% of the damage. Butch should get credit for that. Okay, it's complete lunacy to say anything other than that. I mean, for real, apply this logic to any other situation. Imagine that you're at a party and there's an altercation that breaks out between guy A and guy B, and guy A pulls out a gun, shoots guy B in the chest 17 times, and then guy B falls into the pool. Okay, are we gonna be like, oh, that guy drowned? No, guy A killed guy B. Okay, that's obvious.
Is that what we should be saying about Rasputin? I don't know why Rasputin came to my mind, about how he was killed. Like, they poisoned him, and then they beat him, and then they shot him, and then they put him into the river, and then the autopsy ends up saying, oh, he died of drowning. But like, he would not have drowned if he hadn't been murdered, you know, with it. So like, it should be a murder case.
Sorry, I'm getting distracted. I get super annoyed when there's some people that have nothing better to do with their lives and look back and retroactively nitpick and try to undermine the accomplishments of others. Honestly, Butch O'Hare probably wouldn't even care this much, because all he cared about was saving his dudes. But also, he's
cared about dubs
than I am. So whatever, moving on. Anyway, so over the next couple of days, things kind of return to normal-ish. However, the USS Lexington is still on mission. They're still making their way to Rabaul so they can attack this port. And then once they get there, they start launching raids. Now, Butch is pumped. He wants to get back up in the air. He wants more combat. That's what he's here for, right? However, it gets decided by Thatch that Butch and Duff are to stay at the USS Lexington while everybody else goes out and conducts raids. And the theory behind that was, or at least the stated theory as to what Thatch told O'Hare was, hey, we're leaving you guys to defend it because we know if everything goes bad, you two by yourselves can defend the USS Lexington against anything.
So they're actually more
Thatch
valuable.
Told him. In reality, Thatch knew that Butch O'Hare was being put up for the Medal of Honor, and so did the rest of the chain of command, and they knew that they could not afford to let Butch get killed in combat. Okay.
Wow. Just from that one engagement that was, 4 or 5 minutes. That's great. I mean, of course, it was crazy impressive, but yeah.
This is early 1942. This is 2 months after Pearl Harbor. The only silver lining, the only good news that America has gotten in the past 90 days was about the Marines and the construction workers making their last stand at Wake Island. And now they've all been captured, either killed or put in internment camps. Okay, America has not had any good news, except now they have the story of Butch O'Hare, the man that became an ace in 4 minutes. Shortly after this, Butch is informed that he...
Yeah, similarly to, the war in Europe, Axis powers were incredibly successful in the early part. I mean, again, you're going to have the advantage when you are able to do things in a surprising fashion. And then it's still, though, about how can you recover, right? And you're spreading yourself too thin. And that's what happened with Japan. It's what happened with Germany and Europe. Spread yourself too thin. And that's what happens, and it's just going to implode. So these first couple of years, so like through 42, the Axis power is very much still at kind of control. Although you're going to start to have things really start to turn in Europe with Stalingrad being the kind of a turning point there, and you're going to get North Africa, and then with the Pacific, Midway kind of seemed as a big turning point there. That took out a lot of the planes and stuff that was used for Pearl Harbor. But that again was another campaign that's going to take a good 3 years to actually fully, turn that, with how, brutal and how tedious island hopping campaign was.
He's going to be receiving the Medal of Honor, to which he directly tells Thatch, I don't want it. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want to have to go back stateside. He wants to stay out there with his men. He still does not feel as though he did anything special.
Get
and
it
the
later.
man that has been his father figure, his mentor for the past couple of years, basically pats Butch on the shoulder and informs him, too bad. Deal with it. You're a hero now. Now you got to go do that, because that's ultimately
doesn't mean he can't come back, right?
For this war effort. And with that, Butch is sent back home stateside, where there is both a literal parade for him when he arrives, and he is then metaphorically paraded around the country, conducting interviews, doing anything he can to boost the morale of the American people and the military in the wake.
Okay. So obviously this is a guy you want out in the air, right? But it seems like policy-wise, it was more important than having, again, this one guy, even though he's very successful, but as a PR thing for the United States government, the United States military, that he would be more useful at home, getting in front of cameras and getting in front of microphones and getting in front of the public, that such a priority for the United States at this time was their image. Right. Don't want to be seen like you're losing the war, because you had the support. Pearl Harbor was something that very much it garnered support for the war. They didn't have to deal with that so much. But obviously, though, if, going into war, but then maintaining the morale are very different things. And if you aren't doing well, like, say, the United States military wasn't at the very beginning, I guess you can see why that would be such an important thing, is you got to get the morale up. Without morale, and it's true, we found that without public support, without good morale, you can't win wars. So interesting, again, that they valued his media presence more than his actual presence on the battlefield. That's really kind of an enlightening thing.
Oracle Parade, he makes his way to the White House, where he is awarded the Medal of Honor by FDR, and his very own wife, Rita, is the one that gets to put it around his neck. And all of this is because he was just some fat kid from St. Louis that wanted some donuts, but also didn't want to walk very far to get them. And honestly, he's still that fat kid at heart. He's
wanted
never
to
been
flew
a star
to them.
athlete. He's never had everybody looking at him. He's never stood in the spotlight for this long. And during this time, he is described as modest, humorous, inarticulate, very nice, and more than a little embarrassed by the entire affair. So he gets paraded around the country helping to sell war bonds until about June of 1942.
Okay, that's super important. This now makes sense of why it's money. So war bonds are basically, it's like giving a loan to the government. And during wartime, the United States has done this. They need money, right? Remember, this was something coming out of the Great Depression, where so much of the money of the U.S. government had been put in infrastructure projects. So to fund the military, you literally are taking loans from your own people, your own citizens. So yes, that was such an important thing to keep that steady stream. And it was useful because the money and the supplies the United States was getting, and with the resources and all that, completely outmatched what the Japanese were doing. And as this war goes on longer and longer, it becomes a war of resources, of which the United States pretty much had limitless, while the Japanese clearly did not.
VF-3 is actually set to come back to Hawaii for some R&R. And while there, VF-3's commander, John Thatch, is set to get a promotion and move on and advance his naval career. And he is going to be replaced by none other than his protege and war hero, Butch O'Hare. On June 19th, 1942, Butch O'Hare formally relieves John Thatch of command of VF-3 as he assumes command himself. John Thatch would then go on to say, and I quote, "I know of no one I would rather see take my old command into new battles." Of course, referring to Butch O'Hare, and this meant more to Butch than winning the Medal of Honor.
Now, just because you're good doesn't mean you're going to be a good trainer or leader. It's like how, like an athlete, just because you are good at the sport doesn't mean you're going to be a good coach. So that's going to be interesting to see if he can do that. Can he communicate? Can he articulate, strategy? But it's much more than that. Like, as a coach myself, it's more than knowing X's and O's. You have to be a motivator. There are so many aspects other than strategy that make a good coach. And in fact, strategy in a lot of ways is much lower down the list than the other things. Can you motivate people? Can you garner respect? Those kind of things are going to be important. So it'll be interesting to see how Butch does with that role, because he's still fairly young.
Unfortunately, this did not mean that Butch was going to get to go back into combat. VF3 had actually been taken, and they are now going to be training all of the new pilots to get ready for war, because America's practice at this point in time was to save all of our best pilots and make them teachers to train the next generation,
Jeez.
as opposed to the Japanese who, well, they used up all their good pilots.
They all died.
So Butch and the remaining combat veterans...
Interesting. What do you think about that strategy? You're taking out your best pilots because they're too valuable. It's like you think you can get the job done with your second tier, pilots, your new guys. It's a lot of confidence to have, I guess. But I don't know if it's just throwing out these young guys and they're like, why are we the ones out front? Like, shouldn't we be following these guys that, have done this before?
You start training a bunch of new guys, and Butch officially becomes known as the King of Maui. Because, he's the war hero. Everybody knows his name. He's training all the new guys. He's in charge. This guy is clearly the main character. And this is an important time because he's training the next generation.
I have a question real quick. What other engagements was Butch involved in? Because he's really just talking about the one there. But what else he did? He had to have done more than just be in this one battle where it was a few minutes,
that he'll eventually take into combat, but he also gets to go home every night and spend time with his wife. And during this period, they end up having a daughter, Kathleen, that he gets to meet in March of 1943. With Butch leading all the training, VF3 became known as Butch's Boys, and a lot of these pilots went on to become aces themselves, and they all had incredible things to say about Butch and the lessons that he was able to pass on to them. Then in August of 1943, VF3 was reinstated as VF6, and they were being stationed on the USS Independence, and they were being sent back into the Pacific Theater for combat. But unlike last time, Butch isn't going to have a plane that's outmatched by Japanese Zeros, because him and his men are not getting Wildcats. They're getting the new Grumman F6F Hellcat. And I cannot stress to you enough what a big difference this is. The Wildcat is outmatched by Japanese planes. The Hellcat, on the other hand, will go on throughout the rest of World War II to rack up a 19-to-1 kill ratio. Ooh. And now Butch and his boys got the new
19-to-1? How much of that is because of, the plane? Because again, the Zeros are good. What's the bigger deal? Is it the plane or is it the pilot? I would always think it's the pilot. But again, the Japanese don't have that kind of successful replacement. I can't imagine is the way that they can replace good pilots like the Americans can. And he was just saying though that how these pilots, for the Americans were not their top tier experienced pilots. They're throwing out there. They are fine with throwing out the new young guys. So that's an incredible ratio.
Hellcats, and they proceed to go and fuck shit up. The first thing they do is they go and they launch raids on Wake Island and Marcus Island. Butch lands a couple of more air-to-air kills, solidifying his status as an ace, even if people like to go back in time and try to discredit some of his kills. Then VF6, now VF3, gets restationed onto the USS Enterprise, and Butch, the war hero, gets put in charge of all 3 squadrons on the USS Enterprise. Okay, here's the problem with that. Butch is now officially a bigwig. He's not supposed to be out there in a Hellcat mixing it up with the enemy anymore. He's supposed to be going up in like a Grumman Avenger, a command plane.
Dude, that thing's
so
a
he can
beast.
See everything, see what's going on, be protected, be safe, be the smart guy up in the tower telling the troops on the ground what to do. Okay, but that's not how Butch gets down, okay? He officially puts in a request that they repaint his Hellcat so that it can be his command and control vehicle, and he's gonna do everything from a Hellcat. And obviously, this is Butch O'Hare, the war hero and fighter ace. Okay. He's gonna get what he wants, and he does just that.
He's on my custom one.
In charge of over 100 pilots on the USS Enterprise, they go and provide air
donuts
support
on
for
it.
the Marine Corps as they make amphibious landings at Tarawa and Macon Island. And with the help of the new Hellcats, they absolutely crush the Japanese in daytime combat, so bad that the Japanese have to ditch the idea altogether. Wow. After the Japanese realize they can no longer go toe-to-toe with the American aviators during daylight, they resort to using night tactics. Basically,
with the war, so much of it being aerial with the island hopping campaigns, you lose the air, you lose. You can't do anything without that. That means if you lose the air, that means your islands, your carriers, all that stuff, which the Japanese were running extremely low on, are completely exposed. You can't do anything. You lose the air, it's over. It's completely over. So yeah,
the Japanese
we all know where this is headed.
Torpedo bombers out in the dark of night, launching.
Now, I should say, fighting on land against the Japanese, that is a different story. That is incredibly brutal and painstaking, and is going to influence, obviously, policy much more than what's going on in the air for things like using the atomic bombs. When you start talking about land invasions of larger bodies of land, I mean, we saw what happened to Okinawa and Iwo Jima, but mainland Japan itself, yeah.
and hoping they hit American ships. Now, it's not super effective because the torpedo bombers can't really aim. However, it's also effective in that the Americans also can't really send planes up to stop them because night fighting at this point in time isn't really a thing. Okay, you gotta realize this is 1943.
Yeah.
Radars are still fairly new technology and they're mostly being used on ground arrays.
So much war in
and
general,
recently
just
they're starting
night versus
to be used
day.
on big naval vessels. They can't cram one of these things inside of a fighter plane yet. So at best, all the Americans can do is use the radar on the ship to see the enemies coming and then essentially brace for impact. They are not going to be able to scramble their own fighters to go up
Not worth it.
radar because everything's relative up there, right? Even if the ship tried to tell the planes where the enemy was, like, is that my left or your left? Is that my guy or is that an enemy? They'd end up shooting more of themselves down than
not worth.
the enemy. It'd be complete chaos. So that's really all the Americans can do is just hope they miss. That was until Butch came up with a plan. What if we took the Avenger, it's a big plane, we crammed a radar into that and then sent the Avenger up with a bunch of Hellcats, and then as long as we could stay in formation, we would be able to tell in relation to ourselves where the enemy was.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, you got your own radar, so that's going to help with the whole navigation thing. But yeah, you're going to have to stay in formation. If anyone breaks formation, which would be a scary thing to do and you're being pursued and you don't have that freedom to be able to break off and do your own maneuvers, that's pretty scary, but it also seems like it's kind of the only thing you have to do. You have to know exactly where everybody is. Otherwise, yeah, that would never work. So, all right, I think I foresee some more success by Butch. Let's see it.
Avenger could be like the enemies to the left, the enemies to the right, and everybody has the same left, the same right. The Avenger could guide everybody. Now, obviously, if the entire thing devolves into a giant dogfight, we're going to have a huge issue, but we should be able to ambush them under the cover of night and stay in formation and hopefully not lose it. And we don't need to go chasing kills. We just need to prevent them from launching torpedoes at the ship. We just need to either shoot them down while maintaining our formation, or we just need to scare them off. So Butch gets permission from the chain of command. They shove a radar inside of a Grumman Avenger, and now he starts developing night fighting tactics, and his crew becomes known as the Black Panthers. So in November 1943, they go up for their first night mission, attempting to intercept Japanese bombers. They were unable to find the Japanese bombers at night.
What year are we in right now?
They didn't get to shoot off their torpedoes, and they got all the planes back on the carrier under the cover of night. So it was deemed a pretty big success. Then November 27th, 1943, they go up for their second night mission. There's two Avengers.
I was thinking maybe this was early or later in the war still, but I mean, it's not going to end here for another 2 more years. So this is still in that time where, you know, the tide is starting to turn, but it's not very clear at that time. Clear yet. And it's not full desperation mode from the Japanese either. We're still not there yet.
Cats divided into two different groups, and they are going to go up there and stop the Japanese bombers. By the time all the American planes get up in the air, the Japanese bombers are so close that the Avengers are having trouble differentiating the radar signatures between the Japanese bombers and the American Hellcats. And before Butch and his wingman can actually find their Avenger and get into formation, Butch's Avenger actually runs into the Japanese bombers first and opens fire. Even though it's not a fighter, it does have some guns, but it's not a lot. Regardless, they're able to shoot down one of the Japanese bombers. And then Butch's Avenger again somehow runs into another Japanese bomber before finding Butch and the wingman, and it shoots that one down too. At this point, it's chaos. Wow. There's multiple planes in the air,
Stay in formation,
and Japanese, and they're in close proximity.
Stay on target.
They don't know who is who. So Butch instructs his wingman and the Avenger to both turn on their cabin lights at the same time, so all three of them can see each other for a brief moment and be able to get into formation. So they turn the cab lights on for a brief second. They all see each other, then they turn them back off right away. At this point, the crew of the Avenger spots a Japanese bomber above Butch approaching him from the rear, most likely attempting to shoot him down. They radio to Butch that he has somebody on his tail, and they radio to the other Hellcat to send them forward to take out the bomber. Butch's wingman in the Hellcat speeds up, intercepts the bomber, opens fire, and the bomber opens fire on Butch. The bomber takes heavy damage and veers off into the darkness, at which point the crew in the Avenger radios, "Butch, we got him. Butch, we got him. Come in. Over." And there's nothing. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but it is believed that the bombing crew got a lucky shot off that pierced Butch's canopy, killing him directly without heavily damaging his plane. It is the only thing that would explain
pure luck. Oh my gosh.
Hit. Despite extraordinary efforts, his remains were never recovered, and he was declared dead 1 year later. In addition to Butch O'Hare, 6 more American pilots would give their lives conducting carrier-based
operations for Butch in the comment section,
utilizing the techniques that Butch O'Hare had helped develop. Those missions are credited with downing 103 Japanese planes that otherwise would have been able to attack defenseless American ships.
Hey, it's why the ratios are 19-1 and not 19-0. It's always that one, and luck is always going to play into that. So
Butch not only saved lives through his direct actions in combat, but through his expert training of the next generation of naval aviators in World War II, and his help developing groundbreaking techniques like the Thatch weave and carrier-based night combat. In conclusion, this is why the airport in Chicago is known as O'Hare International Airport. It's named after a famous man named Edward O'Hare. And no, not the famous mafia lawyer that had
I did not know that.
and was famously assassinated, but rather his
Thought it was like a politician
the man
or
that
something.
overcame the sins of his father,
Some other
to become
one.
one of the greatest war heroes in American history. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Whack bang, out.
All right, another incredible story told so well by the Fat Electrician there. Hopefully I was able to interject some stuff about context of the war and kind of the big picture, but another one of those things where I'm learning so much more than maybe I add to that. But that's also why I like covering this channel so much, and hopefully you guys like that as well. All right, with that, we'll see y'all next time.